Hello, everybody. I'm a practicing therapist and a doctoral student of psychology. Today, I wanted to go over the person that an avoidant tends to change for, a specific person. So before we get into it, it is important to know that no one will change if they don't want to. You can be a certain person and they're just not going to change. Avoidance and people in general don't really change for a person, but it can happen. And I have seen it in my practice where an avoidant will specifically declare that they changed because of this person that they're with. And it does actually happen. And I think if I told you it doesn't and change is completely internal and has no external variables, including a person, I would be lying to you because it's not true. People do change for specific people. If you have been a person who has changed for a specific person, you know what that feels like. If you've seen it in your family function, relationships, whatever it is, you know that this is true. People do change for specific people. If a person doesn't change, that doesn't mean they don't love you, and it doesn't necessarily measure love, but it can. And so that's really important to remember. So before we get into it, folks, I want you guys to understand that if a person is not changing for you, it's not your fault. You could be the perfect person for them and the timing could be wrong. Their perception of what's going on could be wrong. And so it's not your fault, okay? So don't blame yourself. Change is not something you can control, but I am going to mention the traits of the person that avoidants have reported, both fearful and dismissive, but particularly dismissive avoidance, but fearful leaning dismissive as well. The traits of the person who they have changed for. And this is something that they have expressed to me in session. And you can see it as well. As you work with patients for months and years, you start seeing what they want and their acknowledgement and desire to change. I see it a lot. And avoidants tend to change for a person in a way where sometimes they're doing it because that it makes the person happy. That doesn't mean they don't want it themselves. It's just the way that they operate. And as I explain some of these traits, you'll kind of see what I'm talking about. But the very first trait that that specific person has is they're authentic and honest. So they're very comfortable with being their actual real self. They're not trying to mold into what they think an avoidant wants, or doesn't even have to be an avoidant, but they're not trying to mold into who they feel like would be more palatable for the general population or for men or women. They see themselves as someone valuable for who they are, and they do truly feel as though if they are not authentic and honest with who they are, they might create more problems down the line for themselves and for their partner. So it also means that they speak truth with compassion and clarity, and they usually encourage, based on their own behaviors and emotions, connection over control because they prefer something more authentic and honest. That sometimes can also mean that this individual is comfortable taking things a little bit slowly or pacing things where it's a little bit more authentic rather than just reaching milestones, if that makes sense. And so an example could be, let's say a person does want to move in with their partner. This is a really common milestone in America where individuals tend to, that's usually a milestone before marriage. Not all the time. It depends on what state you're at or what area of the state, because there are some parts of my state where people wait till marriage to get married, but they're in the cities especially I said wait till marriage to get married, wait till marriage to move in together. But there are areas where more dense population, cities, etc., where actually moving in is a step that should happen or perceived to happen before getting married. So it's like a test of compatibility. So an example could be that an individual wants to get married, I keep saying married, moving in with their partner before marriage, okay? So let's say this person it doesn't matter about their attachment style, but they're like that specific person that an avoidant tends to change for. The usual way that this goes is they do clarify that this is what they want, but they're okay waiting because they understand that their partner is a little bit more apprehensive. And so if the avoidant individual gets defensive about this, they get defensive about moving in, or they think it's moving too fast, this specific person does not take it personally, but puts it back on their partner in a gentle way. They may say, I understand that this topic's uncomfortable. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable, and I apologize if it came across that way. At one point, I would like to revisit moving in, but if that's not possible, I can understand that. And so they don't take it personal, so their reactions are much more authentic, and they're much less negative to what's going on. They don't take things too internally. They don't take it as there's something wrong with them, okay? So that's why it can come across a little bit more authentic, because they're not listening to multiple different sources. Oh, your boyfriend should be moving in with you at this time, or if she's not moving in with you, then maybe she's got another guy. Like, it's not like that. They believe that things happen a certain way, and it's okay with the process that things are going. They trust the process, okay? They tend to be supportive, but without enabling. And I did make a video about how enabling actually stunts in avoidance growth, and that is very true. You never want to enable somebody, because enabling hurts both of you guys, and it's not a healthy dynamic. Most avoidants don't even appreciate being enabled, and if they find out that they were being enabled, sometimes they can feel pretty frustrated because they take it personally. And it's not your fault, but I am saying, like, they might think that you're scared of them, or you don't respect them for who they are, you don't believe in them, and that could be true. And maybe they earned that, but enabling never helps. It typically doesn't. And so being supportive without enabling is encouraging growth and potential, but it also means that you're not pretending like everything's fine, and you're still expecting your partner to show up. Maybe not the way that you would want ideally, but you're still expecting your partner to answer messages. You're still expecting your partner to, if they storm off when they're angry, they come back. You're still expecting an apology at one point, maybe right after you guys reconnect. And so these types of expectations come with supportive nature, right? I understand that you need some space. I'll give you that. Or I appreciate you always trying to be as romantic. I know that you're not a romantic guy, and I appreciate every gesture that you show, right? So you're supportive, but you're not enabling and saying, I don't mind that you never hug me. I don't mind that you never kiss me. I know that you're avoidant. This is the way you are, right? No, you're not saying that. You're saying that I appreciate the romance that you do give. You know, and that's something that, I expect moving forward. I just really appreciate that, and I think that's important that we have that. So supportive, right? But you're not enabling. The next one is inspires but not pressures. Now, this is something that's a little bit, it's very dependent on an avoidant and how they feel, what inspires them. But a lot of avoidant individuals, they report that they feel inspired by how their partner operates. Okay, I saw this pretty recently, so I'm going to give an example that's similar to what I was seeing. So it's that this person's perspective of life does not change to please their partner, okay? So let's say we have a female and a male. Let's say the male is avoidant, but not all males are avoidant, right? I have mentioned many times plenty of females that are avoidant, okay? But this is an example. Female doesn't matter what her attachment style is, and then the male is avoidant. Let's say this female is Christian, and her partner is not as religious as her. Maybe he still grew up in a Christian family, but he doesn't really practice, and he doesn't really consider himself too religious. While he still subscribes to the concept of being Christian, he does not put that at the forefront of his personality. And would she ideally want to be with somebody who has the same religious affiliation as her? Probably. But she never pressures him. Rather, what she does is she shows her religion through herself, appreciating God, mentioning that she prays for his safety when he goes on a flight, mentions God in a positive way, encourages him just to be closer to God because he believes, right? Maybe she could mention, hey, I know that it's been a rough day, and I had a rough day myself. Work's been really difficult for me, but I always try to remember that I'm grateful that God has given me a job. And see, avoidant individuals don't like to mull in negativity. It's actually not always a good thing, but they really avoid feeling negative for too long, which is why sometimes they jump into maladaptive behaviors. But sometimes that can be a good way to encourage these individuals, right? So for example, like she just, in our example, she was saying, I know life was difficult. I've been having a lot of struggles financially, but, grateful that I have a job. And so she still allowed the emotion of financial difficulty to be expressed slightly from her perspective, right? But she mentioned towards the end, but I appreciate that God gave me a job. So This is easier for her partner, him, to feel more inspired to lean into religion because she communicated in a way that he understands, right? Not mulling and sulking into the negative emotions and looking for a positive outlet and source. And for her source, it was God. And considering he does believe and perceives himself to be Christian, he's starting to lean into probably more Christianity rituals and spirituality because of his partner. And so she didn't pressure him, she inspired him. And this typically is motivation and not threatening, okay? And the reason why I said this is very specific to each individual is because a lot of people don't even have this conflict, religion or connecting with one another from the spirituality perspective. But this was just an example that comes up a lot where I practice. And so that was a really important example that I felt you guys might need. Some of you guys might. The next one is this person is emotionally calm. This doesn't mean they never cry or they don't get upset. They're human, but they tend to not let their reactions get in the way of what they're trying to communicate or the results of whatever is going on emotionally between these two individuals. So I saw an argument with one of my couples recently in session. And of course, I'm not going to go into detail, but basically the avoidant and their partner was fighting about him being stressed about work. And this is really common. So we'll just say this as an example because this is very common. And I'm going to, of course, give it as an example. He's been really stressed about work. He's not hitting the numbers he is hitting his numbers, but he is an overachiever. So he likes to reach more numbers, for example, right? And so he's feeling really, really stressed that he's just barely meeting the threshold that he wants, okay? And when he is stressed, and avoidants are like this, but more particularly male avoidants are like this, where when they're stressed, they're a little bit less affectionate in their relationships. And his partner was not appreciating the fact that he was a little bit more on his phone, work phone, it's important, but he's not setting those boundaries. He's bleeding it off into later parts of the day, in between their dates. He's more distant. He's not kissing her as often, not much compliments, and she's feeling really emotionally neglected, but she knows it's not his fault. But that doesn't mean that she's going to just sit and wait until his work stress is gone. He needs to be able to manage his work stress while still being able to be emotionally available when they're together, right? And so she mentioned these things. I noticed that you've been a little bit busy. I think you've been a little bit short with me. And that's my perception. I'm not saying it's anything wrong with that, but can we make it a point to be more romantic and more intentional together? And let's say he said yes, but maybe he got upset a little bit and he's like, I don't get what you mean. I do compliment you. I try to be intentional. Last week I bought you X, Y, and Z and we went on a date. And she can say, yeah, I do appreciate that. And she's emotionally calm, even though he's a little bit crashing out. And maybe she's hurt about him being upset. And maybe he raised his voice and that really hurt her. And she's still hurt about it, but she's still expressing herself and saying, I understand and I appreciate that. I was just mentioning that I noticed you've been on your phone a little bit more. And that I think is really important. And you haven't been kissing me as often. And I think that's just what I would like. And I didn't mean to put you in the defensive, and I apologize for that. And so she apologizes for the fact that maybe she came across a certain way. She doesn't have to apologize, honestly, but this happens a lot. And sometimes avoidance, just hearing, I apologize that I made you feel that way, that's enough for an avoidant to feel. You don't have to say, I apologize, I was wrong. You don't have to say that. I apologize that I made you feel that way. Avoidant, that works pretty well to kind of reduce that tension that avoidant individuals feel when you may express your emotions, okay? So she was still emotional. She still held on to what she felt, but she expressed it in a way that kind of put him out of the defensive, if that makes sense, okay? The next one is prefers harmony over constant conflict. Now, I talk about this a lot, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but in general, all this means is the specific person that an avoidant tends to change for is somebody who respects that maybe harmony and consistency might be more valuable than continuously always hashing it out and having conflict to make progress in the relationship. Sometimes it's okay to leave the relationship where it is for a couple of months, a couple of years, depending on how long you guys have been together. And putting some conflict that's not too important or not too major aside, and only really working towards things that make sense to work towards at this moment. Or if you feel like there needs to be a little bit more disagreements, understand that you can still take breaks from it, right? That doesn't mean never have conflict, but it means pick your battles. That's all it means, okay? The next one is a person who is resilient in general. This comes up a lot. A lot of avoidant individuals verbally mention that they really appreciated that this partner was able to handle the conflicts and challenges in their relationship without falling apart, without blaming others, and that this person was very emotionally balanced. That doesn't mean become a doormat. That is not what this means. It just means that avoidant individuals really prefer somebody who understands that they're not a walk in the park. Every single avoidant, they know that. That's not even really offensive to most avoidants because they already have accepted, I know I'm not a walk in the park. That's actually why they avoid romantic relationships. One of the reasons, right? And the fact that you, the specific person, was able to appreciate that they're still putting in effort and you're not blaming them and you're trying to work with them. This is one of the biggest reasons an avoidant will change for a specific person, because they almost feel like you've showed me what I think love is. Avoidant individuals, whether it's healthy or not, they do believe that a person that's there for them, both thick and thin, tends to be the person that I'm not saying to stay with all the negativity and mistreatment, but avoidant individuals do like if you can, navigate certain things, that you don't have the expectation things are going to get fixed right away and you're more resilient. That typically is the person that avoidant individuals really want to be with, and they feel so loved and appreciated. They almost want to, like I had mentioned, they change for you specifically because they want to make you happy. This is usually where that trait is, that they, you put up with me, you deal with me, you're here with me. I never thought I could be loved, and yet you love me and you take care of me. And I put so much effort into taking care of you. I want to give you more. I want to give you everything. And this is the trait that typically is most common where they actually change for a specific person. All of these, but that one, I would say, is highlighted because it's brought up a lot in session. And the very last one is purpose driven. Avoidant individuals really appreciate individuals who have goals. They're passionate about certain things. They have a sense of direction, is probably a good way to put it. And it often pushes the avoidant subconsciously to reflect on their own purpose. And sometimes, and typically is, that purpose can be also connecting with you, okay? And so those are the traits, the specific traits of a specific person that avoidants tend to change for, okay? I hope this video was helpful. Please like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.